Hey everyone, Nigel and Luke here, and welcome to Crime Zone. As we've mentioned countless times on this channel, there really is no end to the weird and sometimes hilarious crime stories that we come across during our research. Today, we've got another list of stories we've been sitting on for a while that we wanted to share with you. These are cases where, whether through bad luck, stupidity, or something else entirely, perpetrators ended up essentially handing themselves directly over to police. Just before we get to today's stories, a reminder that if you find our videos interesting and informative, to like and subscribe for more true crime content like this. It really helps us to continue building the channel, and if you've watched a few of our videos already, you might not even realize that you're not subscribed. While you're there, don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases. With that out of the way, let's get to the video. On March 10th, 2011, a 45-year-old man from the city of Mesa, Arizona, was in the midst of his typical workday morning routine when he heard something that put him on edge. There were loud noises coming from the bedroom of his apartment, even though he knew he was the only one who was supposed to be home at the time. After arming himself with the closest thing he could find, a broom, the 45-year-old headed into his bedroom to see what was going on. What he found there was somehow both more terrifying and amusing than he could have imagined. On the one hand, the 45-year-old was the victim of an active burglary attempt. On the other hand, it didn't seem like that burglary was panning out particularly well. It turned out that the man, later identified as 20-year-old Michael Trias, had gotten inside by leaping in through the window of the 45-year-old's bedroom. The problem was that he hadn't bothered to check to see what was below the window before he did. It was the 45-year-old's laundry basket, which was made out of a combination of PVC tubing and netting. Trias was now stuck inside the basket. In other words, he was hampered by the hamper. Over the course of a few tense minutes, the 45-year-old reportedly helped Trias get out of the laundry hamper. This was apparently quite the job, as the 20-year-old had gotten himself pretty stuck in the netting, initially breaking a bunch of things in a futile attempt to free himself. Once Trias was out, the only thing left to do was wait for the police to arrive, which Trias did after being walked outside by the resident. He was arrested and ultimately sentenced to 2 years and 9 months on second-degree burglary charges. In May of 2015, a woman in the city of Chickasha, Oklahoma, called police to report that she had been the victim of a burglary. The back door of her home had been kicked in, and about $4,000 worth of items were missing from inside, including 2 TVs, a set of golf clubs, a camera, an air conditioner, a couple of fishing poles, and a Presto brand deep fryer. While home burglaries normally have some of the most depressing statistics in terms of their chances of being solved, thankfully, this particular case wasn't much of a head-scratcher. In fact, after just a brief investigation, police were pretty sure that they knew what had happened. The key to the whole thing turned out to be the aforementioned deep fryer, which apparently had not been emptied by its owner after its previous use. While perhaps questionable in terms of food quality and safety, in this case, it turned out to be quite helpful. You see, when police began looking at the crime scene, they noticed a patch of what appeared to be grease spots in several areas on the back porch right next to the kicked-in door. These noticeable patches continued to the home's back gate, out onto the road, and across the street to the property of one of the victim's neighbors, Stephen McCarthy. After following the grease trail, officers knocked on McCarthy's door and asked him if they could have a quick look around. He apparently said yes, and once police were inside, it wasn't long before they started to make a series of interesting discoveries. One by one, items that had been reported missing from the victim's house were recovered, in what we can only imagine felt like the world's most boring and incriminating scavenger hunt. The TVs and fishing poles were found under a child's bed, a camera was in a baby's crib, the air conditioner was in a closet, and our old friend the deep fryer was reportedly discovered in a utility room above the dryer. It turned out that McCarthy, along with an accomplice named William Beecher, had robbed the woman's house while they were drunk. While we can't say for certain, it seems like this is how they managed to slosh grease all over the place without noticing that they were leaving a literal trail of evidence behind them. According to reports at the time, McCarthy's neighbors were stunned that he could have done such a thing. He had a reputation as a family man in the neighborhood and was actually friends with the victim. In an interview with local news, she even said that she would remain friends with him after the fact. While forgiveness is certainly a virtue, unfortunately for McCarthy, it didn't extend to the criminal case against him. Him and Beecher were both convicted of second-degree burglary and were subsequently sentenced to 5 and 7-year prison terms, respectively. Imagine, if you will, the following scenario. You're a bank robber who has just pulled off a small, albeit successful heist, and a few days have now passed, and you've managed not to get yourself caught. Even better, the police and the media have released reports about your crime, and it seems like they have no real leads. On top of this, some of the details that they do have about you appear to be wrong. What do? Do you A, turn yourself in because you feel guilty now and realize that this was all a mistake? B, enjoy your new ill-gotten money and consider yourself lucky that the police have apparently messed up? Or C, taunt the police and the media by sending emails from your easily traceable personal account, revealing key details in your message about the crime that investigators didn't have before. If you answered C, you might just be the subject of our next story. The whole thing started on August 10th, 2010, when a bank in the town of Röttingen in the German state of Bavaria was the victim of a robbery. The perpetrator was wearing sunglasses and a hat and threatened staff members with a knife. He managed to make off with 2,500 euros and fled shortly after. Though police had surveillance images from the bank to work with, these weren't the greatest since the suspect had obscured part of his face. Still, the man's photo was released by investigators along with a basic description, which was circulated by several German news organizations. The description of the suspect read, quote, "Male, approximately 180 to 185 centimeters tall, approximately 20 to 25 years old, has dark short hair. The man spoke German with a southern Bavarian accent." The report also mentioned that the man fled on foot and had made off with several hundred euros. While police were counting on responses from the public, one person they didn't anticipate hearing from was the suspect himself. However, that's precisely what happened a week later, after the man saw these news reports and apparently decided to set the record straight. In an email sent to police and at least 2 large German media outlets, the man started off by correcting the personal description, saying that authorities had gotten his age, height, and accent wrong. Apparently, the height thing really bothered him, because he specifically went out of his way to mention that he was in fact 193 centimeters tall. The suspect went on to mock the investigation, saying, quote, "I didn't flee on foot. I had 4 wheels under my butt. I drove straight through your police barriers. That's not proper police work." He even went on to give details about where he had left his getaway car and shared the exact amount of money he had stolen, something that had previously not been reported. Oh yeah, and his approximate location. He said that in the days since the crime, he had taken an intercity express train to the city of Hampered. He said that he didn't mind sharing the info because he had no faith in the ability of police to find him there. In a final sneering jab, he added, quote, "FYI, Hamburg is big." Despite the suspect's arrogance, police were grateful for the helpful leads he provided. In a matter of hours, they had managed to track down his getaway car at the parking garage where he had taken the train, and by tracing the emails he sent, narrowed down his location within Hamburg. It turned out that the suspect was a 19-year-old man, identified by reports only as David S. While we weren't able to find much more information about the case from here, news outlets from the time did provide one final detail. Apparently, David was quite surprised when police showed up at the gambling hall where he was to place him under arrest. On the night of December 14th, 2008, a concerned motorist in the city of Grapevine, Texas, called to report a suspicious vehicle. The man said that there was a white pickup truck following him with red and blue flashing lights, and that he had also seen this vehicle trying to pull over other drivers. Based on the caller's description, at first, police thought that the truck might be a legitimate law enforcement vehicle. After all, from the sounds of it, the lights were similar to ones that some departments used on their undercover cruisers. That being said, because of the suspicious way the driver was acting, Grapevine police went to check the situation out. When officers arrived at the scene, they conducted a traffic stop of their own on the driver of the white pickup. Sure enough, the driver had quite the elaborate lighting system set up on his vehicle. However, it didn't take long for police to confirm that he was not a fellow officer. For starters, the driver, 22-year-old Aiden Juarez Ramirez, would not explain why he had the lights on his truck or what he planned to do if he had actually managed to stop someone. He also wasn't a US citizen. He was from Mexico and had no credentials to speak of. Well, no real ones anyway. The most bizarre part of the whole story came when police discovered what Ramirez had presumably planned to use as his fake police identification. It was a Chipotle gift card, which he had blacked out and then crudely etched the word police into. Hilariously, the Chipotle logo was still visible at the top of the card. What's particularly amusing about the whole thing is just how bad the card looked, considering how much work the 22-year-old had obviously put into making his vehicle look legitimate. As you might imagine, Ramirez was arrested at the scene for impersonating a police officer. When you were a kid, chances are that at one point or another, your parents hit you with the classic line, "Money doesn't grow on trees." While most of us realized that this was not meant to be taken literally and was more of a reminder about fiscal responsibility and the dangers of reckless spending, unfortunately, there always seems to be those few people out there who miss the point. Instead of taking away any kind of wisdom, they set out to find the money tree, or better yet, make their own out of a cheap inkjet printer. This is precisely what happened in March of 2013, when a Wisconsin man named Jared Carr obtained a printer from his local Walmart, evidently believing that he could print his way to a small fortune. We say obtained rather than purchased, because we don't actually know if he bought it. Don't worry, that'll become relevant in just a second. Anyway, after grabbing some heavyweight paper, Carr reportedly got down to the highly illegal business of printing off counterfeit currency. Rather than messing around with smaller bills, he apparently made the classy choice of going for all hundreds as well. I mean, go big or go home, am I right? Unfortunately for Carr, things hit a snag when the printer started to malfunction. Reports don't mention what the problem was exactly, but I personally think it's fun to believe that the machine simply had a crisis of conscience. In either case, it meant that Carr needed a new printer. Ironically, even though Carr was presumably doing all of this so that he would have endless amounts of money at his disposal, he apparently decided that he still wanted a refund on the broken printer. So, he hastily packed it up and took it down to the Walmart in Lake Hallie, a small village in Chippewa County. When Carr got to the store, he demanded a refund for his printer, even though he had no receipt, and several pieces of the machine, including the paper tray and installer CD, were missing. Employees were in the middle of explaining why a return wouldn't be possible, when lo and behold, a sheet of Carr's fake money was found still in the machine. There were 2 fake hundreds printed on it, and an area of the paper was missing where it was clear that he had carefully cut out a third. At this point, you might imagine that Carr knew he was well and truly busted. I mean, it's obvious to everyone present you've been counterfeiting money, so you'd think he'd want to hightail it out of there. However, this is not what happened. Instead, Carr became even more insistent about returning the printer and even bizarrely tried to barter with the store's employees. At first, he said he would accept a lower price for the printer and eventually haggled himself down to taking just 50% of the original cost. Unfortunately for Carr, he was the only one involved in this process. Employees simply wanted him to leave. After reportedly giving him every chance to simply walk away, the police were called and he was placed under arrest. As if things couldn't get worse for Carr, once he got to the local jail, officers discovered that he had 3 more of his counterfeit $100 bills on him. Not only that, but he had 2 felony warrants in a neighboring county for robbery and burglary. Carr was eventually convicted of forgery and obstructing an officer. If you're in the market for an anti-drug PSA, it doesn't get much more straightforward than this next story. Seriously, kids, don't smoke crack. On December 30th, 2014, police in Daytona Beach, Florida received a 911 call from a 31-year-old man named John Arwood. Arwood explained that he and a woman, 25-year-old Amber Campbell, were trapped in a closet somewhere on the campus of Daytona State College and could not get out. When police arrived at the scene, which turned out to be a janitor's closet at the college's Marine and Environmental Science Center, they found Arwood and Campbell shaken, but more or less okay. They explained that they had been stuck in the closet for more than 2 days. This was unfortunately pretty easy to verify, thanks to a pile of human feces that was found in the closet. Obviously, where Arwood and Campbell had been, doing their business for the past couple of days. What was more difficult to verify, however, was how the couple had actually become trapped. You see, the door wasn't actually locked. An officer, who I can only imagine drew the short straw, ended up testing this and found that he was unable to lock himself in the now poop-filled room. It turned out that there was a totally reasonable explanation, though. You see, upon further inspection, police found copper scouring pads that are sometimes used to help smoke crack. While there were no drugs found at the scene, according to police, the closet did smell like crack. You know, in addition to human excrement. If you're wondering how Arwood was finally able to call for help, apparently he had a cell phone with him the entire time. It's unclear if he and Campbell simply forgot about this or chose to delay calling police because they were still hoping to find a way out of the closet on their own, but we're going to go out on a limb here and speculate that in either case, we can probably also blame this on the crack. Following their rescue, Arwood and Campbell were arrested and charged with trespassing. Campbell was also charged for violating her parole. Both reportedly had extensive prior criminal histories, though we're guessing not for anything quite this embarrassing. Alright, for our final story today, here's another bank robbery scenario for you. You've just committed a spree of bank heists in the local area and have managed to get away with at least 2 with moderate success. You've just left the scene of a robbery and are now on the way to case another bank, but you see a local news truck just across the parking lot. Do you A. flee the scene immediately and hope that no one has spotted you, B. continue on to case the bank but definitely stay away from that news truck, or C. walk right up to the news truck and agree to do an interview about a possible expansion of the public transit system, making sure to remove your disguise and give your real name to the reporter before starting? If you answered C, you might just be the subject of our next story. According to reports, November 7th, 2017 was a big day for 24-year-old Eric Rivers of Georgia. Having already allegedly robbed a bank a week earlier, he was now getting much more ambitious. That day, he would go to 4 more banks in Gwinnett County, casing 3 of them and reportedly robbing a 4th, a Chase Bank on the 600 block of Collins Hill Road in the city of Lawrenceville. During that robbery, as he did in all the other banks, Rivers apparently hung around the scene for about 30 minutes before finally making his move, sliding a note to one of the tellers there and demanding money and saying that he had a gun. He was able to make off with an undisclosed amount of money. However, the Chase Bank was actually Rivers' second last planned stop of the day. He still had one more bank that he wanted to case before he called it quits. Despite this, and of course the robbery he had just committed, when Rivers spotted a WGCL news truck just across the parking lot, he apparently decided he had time to stop for an interview. The station was working on a TV news story about the possible expansion of public transit into Gwinnett County, and whether this might help to alleviate traffic in the local area. Removing the hat and do-rag he had allegedly worn during the bulk of his crime spree, Rivers stated that he thought the Metropolitan Atlanta Regional Transit Authority coming out there would really help because Gwinnett County didn't really have its own public transit system. As appreciated as these insights surely were by the TV news crew, Rivers' on-camera appearance was apparently even more appreciated by Lawrenceville police. They were able to find out the 24-year-old's real name after the Chase Bank manager at the previous crime scene told them that they had seen him walking towards the WGCL news truck, and he was arrested later that day. In light of the amusing situation, the Lawrenceville Police Department roasted Rivers pretty hard in a subsequent post to their Facebook page. The post read in part, quote, "When after having robbed several banks and you are at another bank casing the place for an additional robbery and are approached by a news crew in the parking lot, here we go, pay close attention. Do not stop and agree to an interview with said news crew. The news anchor might be pretty, but fight the urge and keep walking. You see, when you accept an interview and provide them with your real name, it actually makes our job too easy." Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a minute to thank our amazing supporters over on Patreon. As many of you are aware, our situation on YouTube always seems to be a bit uncertain, but our patrons help to ensure that we can continue to make content like this long term without having to worry as much about what surprises might be thrown our way. Plus, patrons also get access to 4 additional stories per week for each of our Crimes of the Week and Crimes of the Week International videos. If you'd like to help support the channel directly, head over to patreon.com/crimezone to join. You can also find that link in the description below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and take care.